Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Jack Rocco. And welcome to the show, Jack. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Simon. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah. So I was Googling Jack again before we spoke today, and I found there's a singer from the west coast of the States, from Anaheim, which is near Disneyland, I think, if I can remember rightly. And I thought, that isn't the Jack Rocco that I'm looking to Google. Maybe he's got his son doing a song for him or something, but no. Jack is you're in between a house move from where did you say it was from? North Carolina to
I'm in North Carolina, moving to Connecticut in the process right now.
Yeah. And promoting the bejesus out of your book at the same time. So
Right. Trying
and you're
to juggle multiple balls in the air.
Yeah. And you're also an orthopedic surgeon, right? So that's a very serious thing. We're not going to be doing much juggling when we're an orthopedic surgeon. So one of the things that I saw on the blurb for your book, and it's an incredible cover, right? I love the cover and the title, Recycled. But it says that Recycled is a powerful reflection on how identity is shaped by the stories we believe about ourselves. And there's so much there, right? You've got the identity bit, and then you've got the belief bit, and it's come on my radar, Jack, that we talk a lot about trauma in the adoptee world, but we don't talk much about beliefs. And for me, that's significant because beliefs are something we can bust. They seem more actionable, just in my opinion, than trauma, which trauma seems like something that's kind of tough to shift and we're going to need help. But beliefs seem somehow to me to be a little bit more easily changed, easily busted. What would you say to that? Do you see that?
Yeah, I like your insight into that concept and that thought. And I think, the book, just as much as I created the book, I think the book also happened to me as well. And, I do struggle with that idea of trauma, that, the victimhood concept that kind of comes with that, that, and also in my career, I mean, I deal with trauma, physical trauma every day, physical trauma, which also generates, mental trauma and stress. And you're right that, the idea of trauma is something that happens to you is one thing. But then I also like, with the idea of nature, nurture, free will, the nurture part of things, I think more of training. When I hear nurturing, I think, and the things that I cover in the book, I cover my schooling, I cover my residency, I cover my military training, and there's also, some athletic training, which can be traumatic as well. So how do you divide that? What is training? What is, working on yourself to be better versus trauma, which occurs to you in a harmful way? And I think I kind of come to the terms that, the trauma is something that happens to you from an outside force, whereas the training is something that comes from within you, focused in a direction that you're trying to go. And I'll give you an example. My son is a wrestler, and we're always focused on, his training and, the things he learns. And if he loses, he didn't lose, he learned. You learn from your losses, you learn from it. And at what point, does it transfer over from training to trauma? And I think it does have a lot to do with control. Like we didn't necessarily have control over our birth history, our adoption history. But at some point, whether you come out of the fog, where you realize, okay, now I have some opportunity here, some free will decisions that I can make to turn this trauma into training in a positive direction. And I try to maintain, some positivity throughout, the book in my experience.
Yeah. Have you heard the term post-traumatic growth?
I can't say I've particularly heard that phrase, but I can understand it, and I like the concept.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain a little more of exactly what you mean.
Well, it is this. It's a three-letter acronym for what you just described, I think. And I think it's a very interesting one for me because it is a term that some uh, psychologists, psychiatrists, psycho something that guys use. It is the use, but when I've asked anybody about that, they haven't heard about it either. Right? It's we have I think we have a negative lens in the Western world, generally speaking, culturally speaking, whether that's UK or US, and we're focused very much on the PTSD rather than the PTG, because that's the way that we are conditioned by society. So what I mean by that is, like, there's a sign, isn't it? This is in the newspaper world. If it bleeds, it leads. Right? There's no such thing. There's no such thing as good news. We want to scare the bejesus out of people, to get them to read our newspaper because there is a clear and present danger going.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've definitely found that, and we seem to be similar in a lot of ways that, you've always known you were an adoptee from what I understand. And I did as well. And, I was told and taught, the positive aspects of adoption, and we focused on the positive. But, you also find out that within the positive, there are just natural negatives, and the positives were all laid upon the feet of my adoptive parents. They chose us, they were selected by the church to be the parents, and they're doing a great job. And that the birth parents, they were bad somehow. They were, you know negligent, they were poor, they were ill prepared, they were young. All these terms that do have negative connotations. And I think you know those were some of my earliest memories and thoughts of the adoption process, that there was a good and a bad outcome, and thank God I ended up on the good side of things. My parents loved me. I wasn't some biological surprise that popped onto their doorstep. They chose me, not some parents who just get a baby because they got pregnant. Those were my earliest, childhood thoughts of it. Um, so it was very positive. So then when I started hearing, in the news or from other adoptees about all their trauma, I was a little, at first I was like, really, what is so traumatic about it? What, and then you hear the stories and I mean, I was way on the positive side of things, but there are clearly negative effects and negative consequences of adoption. Um, and like I said, so the idea that I had trauma was something I almost denied, that I didn't have any trauma. I had a blessed life. I had a very good life. I had no trauma. But then you think about it, that separation from a mother, I mean, it's in a pre-conscious state before you really observe it. But, that pre-conscious trauma that the child is exposed to, that relinquishment by the mother, that's clearly something that sets them on a course which puts them at higher risk for, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So trauma is clearly an element of adoption. But I like your approach. I like your idea of, the thriving adoptee. How do you, yeah, okay, let's face it, we have some trauma. What do we need to do to recover from that trauma? If someone's in a traumatic car accident, they go to the emergency room and they see an orthopedic surgeon, and he tries to fix that trauma and get them back as close to, a functional, normal life. So what do we do as adoptees to deal with this trauma and recover from this trauma in a positive way? So I do like that approach, and I commend you for taking that approach.
I, I guess because it's just because I dipped, right? So I was okay, and then I wasn't okay, and then I had to dig myself out. So and then some of my beliefs shifted. So and some of my trauma shifted with those beliefs. Um, uh, my question to you was on that, because of this beliefs thing. What were the beliefs that shifted for you? What were the beliefs that you had about yourself that changed as you
Right.
came out of the fog weather?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, some of mine was that I had no trauma. I had a blessed life. My beliefs were that, my birth parents were somehow bad and that my adoptive parents were somehow good. But then as I started seeing some of the negative aspects of it, same thing that you said. I had difficulties with my marriage. And looking back, I probably had a lot of difficulties with, finding my place, if you will. My story goes through a lot of changes, a lot of journeys. Going to the military. I was in Japan. Then we had mission trips in Madagascar. So, I was always looking for something, and my beliefs that I had this perfect life, I think, changed dramatically to the point that I'm like, you know what? I was under a lot of stress and hardship in trying to just figure out me. So once I kind of came to terms with that, it took me on a lot of different courses. Unfortunately, I don't have a direct, straight, linear path like most people. It was spurts and fits, and good things and bad things, and looking for the positive. But I my big genetic surprise, if you will, is a mixed race. I have a mixed race heritage, and I grew up in an era where my parents were very proud of their Italian heritage, and my father used to say, there's two types of people in this world: Italians and those who wish they were. And that's a very they were proud of their ethnicity and their food and their culture and Michelangelo and all things Italian, which is fine. They should be proud of those things. But what I later realized is that I'm one of those others who are not Italian. Even though I was raised in Italian, I was one of those who wasn't, and who, quote unquote, wanted to be. So and then the idea of, well, does this make my parents racist that they knew of my ethnicity but didn't want to tell me about it? Does this make my parents racist? Because that's a word that's thrown around a lot as well. um and I kind of come to, not really giving away an ending or anything, but there's different ranges of racism and racist behavior, and I think we all, to a certain degree, have some element of racism. You look at someone who looks like you, and you're like, that's a good guy right there. He looks just like me. He's someone I can trust. He's someone I know. And if that person is your relative, if that person is your father, you're like, oh, yeah, I look just like my father. My father's good. I'm good. We're good. And anyone who's not us is not good or suspect. They have to prove themselves to get into our little circle. And I think we all do that. I think, it gets thrown on race, but blacks have done it over the centuries and generations with, are they a light skinned black versus a dark skinned black? Are they, and there was a thing called the brown paper bag test, where you couldn't get into a black group if your skin was lighter than a brown paper bag. So these are things that were overtly, used to determine someone's, right to belong or right of goodness versus badness, you know. And I think the thing that I've really changed in my belief, is that there really is no definition of good or bad per se. It's just different, and over the years I spent time in Japan where, I assimilated with the Japanese culture, very much in depth. Um, and as I got closer to them, I realized that, they're not bad. Their food is not bad. They're people like everyone else. They're just living in a different circumstance. So, my beliefs have become more open and more broad to, understanding humans as a whole, not necessarily individualistic as a country, as a Brit, as a German, as a Japanese, and it's opened my mind to, I think many more possibilities of goodness, just differences.
Okay. Can I take you back to the top of the conversation when you talked about trauma being something that happened to us, right? And there's also this sense that trauma, well, the one that the book that everybody quotes is this Bessel van der Kolk book, a book saying that the body keeps the score, body knows the score, and the fact that so this trauma is not just an event that happened to us in the past. So in my case, 56 years ago, but it's something that is remembered by the cells of our body, and therefore it's wait this stuff is waiting to be triggered, and so and when it's triggered, we're gonna explode in a small way or a big way. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I do believe it. I was a neuroscience major in undergrad, so I have a fairly extensive understanding of, the brain and neural development. Um, that was something in my early training, and I think it's something that's affected me my whole life. And I mean, you can use the example of, the simplest one is, Pavlov and his dog. That if you ring a bell and you deliver food, or you find a trigger to cause him, that every time you ring the bell now, he will salivate, whether the food is there or not. And there's all sorts of examples of that. I did some research and work in addiction. And, it's very interesting with addiction that what we did was we changed the environment in which the addiction took place. And there is an environmentally associated trigger that stimulates your ability to metabolize the drug. And, I'll give you an example. Like if someone's a smoker, a lot of times they'll smoke after eating or smoke after or during an activity. So that activity that they're doing, if they're eating, their liver is already anticipating the fact that they will be getting nicotine soon. If they smoke every time after they eat, their liver is learning. So your liver doesn't have a brain, the liver doesn't think, but the liver acts as though it is thinking, whether that be neurologically mediated or hormonally mediated or environmentally mediated. The act of them sitting down, their liver starts forming enzymes to metabolize nicotine so that when they get the nicotine, they're already metabolizing it right away. So they don't get that same hit. So they need more nicotine to get the same effect. And so I think that's true with, any experience. If you had a traumatic experience of someone leaving you, so, for instance, and you had a tragic reaction to that, like a physical bodily reaction to that relinquishment, that now 50 years later, 30 years later, after that maternal relinquishment, you're in a situation that is very similar to that. You're in a situation where you may be moving. You're in a situation where, your relationship may be struggling, so that you start reacting to that environmental cue as if you're being relinquished again by the mother. That there's a learned reaction there that is very understandable from, from the psychologic standpoint. And what we did with the nicotine, we basically got rats addicted to nicotine over a period of time, and we put them through a process where we'd weigh them and then take that weight and determine the amount of nicotine to give them. And then on the test day, we didn't do the weighing. We just gave them the same dose that they had before. So these were animals that developed a tolerance to nicotine, that at 30 days, they had complete, no reaction to nicotine. All right. So they are completely addicted, completely tolerant of nicotine. So now on the 31st day, we just took them out and gave them the same dose without the warning of being weighed. And these rats went back to having zero tolerance for nicotine. Some of the rats seized, some of them, twitched, they passed out. So they had lost all their tolerance just because we changed the environment. And it's a little difficult to go through, the details of the research on a podcast here, but it was remarkable. Without the environmental cue, they had lost all their addiction. And, that's when a lot of times where an overdose may occur. The rumors were that, like John Belushi, when he passed away, his girlfriend administered the drugs to him. So he didn't have the pre-warning that he was about to receive the drug. And they believe it was that lack of environmental cues that led to his overdose.
Yeah. So what can we learn from that in the adoptee world and this trauma?
I think if you say that the body remembers, I would say yes, it does. I would say your brainstem, your fundamental organs, in your body do remember. But I think through therapy, through understanding that, hey, you know what? I'm in a situation where I'm moving. My situation is stressed right now. I may be encountering a trigger reaction to a lot of these things. So I do believe that the body does remember, quote unquote, remember. It reacts to stress. Your body, that you're designed to react to stress for survival. And if you know that you were in a traumatic experience, the next time you're in a similar experience, you have to defend yourself in a way. But sometimes that is, and that is advantageous, and I think in other ways it may be detrimental.
Yeah. So the two key things that I'm getting from that is that the understanding, the understanding takes you some way. A rational level understanding takes you so far, and then a change in your environment might again take you a little bit further, or that might take you somewhere. And also the therapy stuff. So probably something that's somatic or one of those, like, because it's pre-verbal, we can't talk it out because we don't have any. We didn't have words when we were going through the trauma. We didn't have any concepts. We couldn't speak when we had that trauma. So what good? This is something that I got from one of the a clinician who had on the show last week. Talk therapy sometimes doesn't work for pre-verbal trauma, because pre-verbal trauma, no words. If you've got no words for it, how are you supposed to talk it out when talk is basically words? So you've got to do something slightly different or totally different. So there's three bits there: the understanding, the change of the environment, and the third one is this therapy bit. I've got another question for you that fascinates me, and I've played around with this. I'd love to hear your take on it. We've got this feeling of relinquishment. We've had, there has been this event, and there's a feeling of fear of the unknown, right? So how does that loss, that sense of loss, which is a felt thing, how does that become a belief? And the central belief as amongst us adoptees is the fact that there's something wrong with us. We're not good at some level. How does a physical thing become a mental construct?
Yeah, I think with the adoptee in particular, I mean, I do believe that early relinquishment, that fact that that, and I love Paul Sunderland's uh, lecture, if you've not heard that, on addiction and adoption, and he covers a lot of it. But it really spoke to me that I do believe that early relinquishment sets things up, that is your reality. Your reality is you're going to have to deal with this world on your own. You have this mother, you have this ally in the womb that you bond to during that pre-birth era, where she's you, that you are one and the same. You're the, she is your soil, you are the sprout, and then all of a sudden at birth, your first exposure to the dry air of the world, you're doing it on your own. You don't go back to the mother to suckle. You don't have that constant bonding and development of a, extra womb relationship with this mother. That's someone you can go to. That's someone you can go to for food, for warmth, for comfort, for clean diapers. That person that you rely on, intimately, the adoptee doesn't have when they're relinquished early. So I believe that adoptee is just, like you say, pre-verbally, they don't understand it. They don't have another understanding of the world. Their world is alone. Their world will always be alone. They will not have their mother. They have to find others, but that other is still not them. That there's, your adoptive parents, your surrogate parents, it's not the same. Those are an outsider. So I think that belief, that trauma of being relinquished provides you with a belief that you're going to have to do a lot of this on your own. And I think a lot of adoptees are, just, they struggle with relationships because they don't trust people. They don't, they can't healthily go to someone else for help or assistance. They feel like they have to do it on their own, which is either, very lonely and very failing, or just, is a recipe for getting yourself in trouble if you can't go to other people for help in the world.
Yeah. So the fascinating point, and I agree with all that. Oh yeah, I have listened to that Paul Sunderland video, and I'm trying to get a guy on the show actually who has a completely different take on PTSD. So fingers crossed. We're just trying to get him in the schedule, and he's done an excellent interview around this, which I'm gonna link in the show notes. So because I think it's a different take to PTSD. Because Paul Sunderland in that video, he likens CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, with adoption trauma. The thing for me, and I'm not sure whether I'm being nitpicky or not. In my world, I'm not. So if I'm being nitpicky, just tell me. Right? One is an experience. Okay, we've got an experience. How does the experience become a belief? So it's not. It sounds to me like there's some mental scaffolding going on. So in the sense, I take this like so. It's a bit like how an avalanche starts, right? So we've got somewhere along the line a question. We ask ourselves a question: why did she relinquish me? Okay, and from that, asking ourselves that question, we come up with a plausible answer, like there's something wrong with me, and that is a P of information, a P of a thought. Like to think about it. That's two. So in I don't know what you call that in in neuroscience. Would you say that it, that's a two? What do they say? What fires together wires together. That
You're right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that, the idea of, you say we ask ourselves a question. When you're in that pre-verbal phase, you're not really complex enough to ask yourself a question. So you're basically going on stimulus response. The stimulus is you're born. The response is, okay, where do I go for food? I need food. Okay. Instead of a mother that you recognize and have a relationship with, you see a nurse who has a bottle. Okay. And then you see another nurse that has a bottle. Then you see another nurse. Then you see a nun who has a bottle. Then you see, you're seeing a bunch of different people in your lives who can give you food. Let's use that as an example. Simple, the natural state is you get your food from your mother, you get your nourishment from your mother, you get your comfort from your mother. Well, when you don't have a mother, and it could be, I wonder how similar, like children whose parents die in birth, a mother who dies in birth, if that child has any of the characteristics of an adoptee, and do they feel this need for being so self-sufficient, that one of my friends, Brad Ewell, he says, he was very, rugged individualist, Texas sergeant, bomb squad leader, tough guy, and he said, if I was on fire, I would rather go get my own bucket of water than ask anyone for help. And I do think that, some of that characteristic of being independent or lonely, I think they come together, for adoptees. That, so the stimulus is loneliness, and the response is, well, I need to survive. What do I have to do to survive? Do I have to scream? Do I have to be cute? Do I have to be loving? Do I have to be funny? And it's a trial and error, I think, over this pre-verbal phase. It's like, oh, wait, if I smile and cuddle, they'll give me food. I mean, we do this with animals. We train animals that way. And in a lot of ways, we're no different. We're much more complex, but some of the basics are very similar. So we learn to be a people pleaser, that if I'm friendly and pleasant and smile and joke and giggle, people will give me love and attention and food and warmth and shelter. That there's a if then statement. There's a a commodity, and there's a price for that commodity. I want love. I'll give a smile and I'll get love. Whereas I think, the idea of unconditional love that you receive ideally from your mother, isn't there. So there is no unconditional love. Everything is conditional with you. And I think adoptees, I think even myself, that life has a condition. With my son and my daughter, there's no condition. I love them whether they win or lose. They're happy or sad. There's that I get them, I understand them, I bond with them without even having to try. I look at their face and I know what they're thinking. There's a connection there. There's a familiarity in the way we speak, the way we act and talk and joke and think, that I immediately like them because they're like me, whereas, the adoptee doesn't have those genetic mirrors that they immediately bond to, or that family that they immediately feel one with. So there is this conditional thing. Like, if I make them happy, I'll get what I need. But then you also expect that from other people. Well, shouldn't they do what I want for me to give their love? And it doesn't always work that way. So I think you definitely you're set up for disappointment and for loneliness, I think, as an adoptee, because of those initial, the initial rules that you were born into. You were born into the fact that I've got to be cute, I've got to be loud, I've got to be noisy, I got to be something in order to get something that I need for survival. There's a cost to your survival that you have to figure out. There's not that immediate, oh, he's so cute, I love him, regardless of what he says or does.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It does. So what we're talking about here, the I had it down like the trauma becomes a belief, and you're saying no, the trauma doesn't come the belief. The trauma is the dominant force because it's all pre-verbal. The kind of the belief that I'm not good enough is kind of separate
Well,
from that, or a
I think it comes
player.
from I think it's directly, I can say it's directly related or a result of the trauma. The trauma results in you being alone. The trauma results in you not having a mother. So that because you don't have a mother, your belief is I'm not going to just be loved because I'm loved. I have to earn love. So I would, I think I could make that leap of, you have a mother, your mother's going to love you. She
Yeah.
just loves you. Matter. Whereas, you're left by your mother. Now you have to find people who love you for something you provide them.
Okay.
It's a transactional relationship.
So this is perhaps a better metaphor than if we think of it like an iceberg. Okay, so the bottom bit that's invisible is the pre-verbal trauma, and the bit at the top is the post-verbal rationalization. So I've been talking about. I never use that. Why have I used this? Is it because I'm talking to a surgeon that I'm raising my game and using posher words? So I'm thinking.
Well, you're British. You're British too, so you automatically whatever you say sounds smarter because you're a Brit with that accent.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, no, you're not. But you're not. You're not complimenting me because you're actually saying it's to do with my race, right?
Oh
So,
no, I'm just
I know
joking.
you're pulling. Yeah, you're pulling my chain.
Yeah.
So I'm. There's. I was seeing cause and effect, and perhaps perhaps I'm oversimplifying it, and perhaps me asking a question about I'm not good enough. There's I'm not good. So I asked a question, but maybe I'm asking that subconsciously. Maybe I'm asking that when I'm 7 or 9, and right at the moment, actually, I'm thinking about a triggering situation when I was in the rugby team for 5 years at school, right? And then I got dropped, and I remember turning away and having a little, because boys don't cry, and I'm 13 and I don't want the other kids to see me crying, the lads to see me crying. I'm turning away, and my eyes are and I'm filled up, and there's a few because I'm feeling that I'm not good enough, that I've been rejected, right? So, right. But the kind of it is that those beliefs are sometimes subconscious and sometimes conscious. They come out into the light of consciousness, and all the kind of stuff that you're talking about here seems to me, like I said, it's tough stuff to deal with. So we talked about understanding it, we talked about changing the environment, and we talked about therapy as ways to get rid of this stuff, right? What I'm talking about is perhaps more simple, less deeply rooted beliefs that you bring them out to the light of awareness. You have a look at them and you see through them, and you realize that the belief is nothing more than a thought that's become kind of solid, and like you bring so like when we were you bring an ice cube out of your fridge in Arizona. This wouldn't work in Britain because it's never hot enough, right? But you bring your you bring your ice cube out of the fridge, and it melts straight away, and then it evaporates and there's nothing there. That's what I think of. That's what I think of beliefs. But maybe I'm oversimplifying it, and maybe I'm
no.
being.
I mean, I think there are probably beliefs that are, I mean, I believe the sun will come out tomorrow. I mean, I'm pretty justified in that based on my experience, you know, but, another, I believe that, my hair is going to grow back tomorrow. That's really hasn't been, I can believe that if I take this medicine, the placebo effect, if you will, if I believe, what, how do that, I think that's probably a challenge to those beliefs is like sometimes believing that the medicine is going to works.
Yeah.
The placebo effect, that if I take this pill, I'm going to feel better. So you take the pill and you feel better. So that reinforces your belief, but it's not true. It's just a sugar pill, you know. Um, so there are, I mean, I think, but it is a good belief that the sun will come out tomorrow. That's a reasonable belief. So I do think that, there are beliefs that are worth um believing in, and there are truths that are complete propaganda. I mean, that I believe that America is the best country because I'm from America. You may believe Britain is the best country because you're from Britain, or any other. You know,
Yeah.
am I wrong or are you wrong? And it's like it's best for me, it's best for you. So there's, what is the belief of bestness or goodness? So I would think that the adoptee, to get back to the point at hand, the adoptee believing that you can't trust people is somewhat true. It's somewhat true that you can't trust people. If you can't trust your mother who gave birth to you to keep you and take care of you, that's a pretty big letdown. Someone who, your mother shouldn't relinquish you. That's just something that should be in our beliefs, that your mother's going to take care of you. That should be a fundamental survival given. But the fact that society had told our mothers that, you know what, you're not good enough to, she was told she's not good enough. You're not good enough to be a mother. You don't have the right amount of money. You don't have the right relationship with this man. You don't have a lot of things that have made you a failure in the eyes of society. So my mother was a failure. That was her belief too. She wasn't married. She was poor. She was a college student, and her you know her sexual partner, her man was African American. So there were so many things that she was being told that she's not good. So you're not even good enough to be a mother. You need to give this baby away. So now this baby has that, is suffering from those beliefs, which, those beliefs were societally based. She was perfectly capable of being a mother. She was perfectly capable of having a relationship with an African American man. She was perfectly capable of becoming pregnant and raising a child. She was perfectly capable. But society believed that she wasn't. So that society put that belief on her. And she went to her doctor, and her doctor said, "Yep, you're too young to have a baby and you're not married. You need to go away and give this child away." And the priest said the same thing. And the parents said the same thing. Everybody in her life told her that she needs to go away and have this baby and give it away because she's not a good parent. So that trauma from the birth mother naturally carries on to the child. And like I said, if you can't trust your mother to fight against those evils of society, and your mother listened to them, not listen to you, you know, I mean, that's painful.
Yeah.
And so that my mother now gave me away. And fortunately for me, it was a good life. It was a good. But had my mother given me to someone who was then abusive, sexually,
Yeah.
abused me, now I'm doubly or triply, let down. And why should I have faith in my mother in society if I can't have faith in my birth mother, my adoptive parents, my job? Like these things get reinforced, these beliefs get reinforced that maybe I can't trust people, so that, and that for some people, it might be a good belief to have, but then it also has the the tail side of that coin is that if you never trust anyone, you're never going to be able to become a useful member of society. You're never going to be able to have a job, have a relationship, have children. So these bad beliefs then become reality in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So the trauma does, but there's so many layers of the trauma, from the mother to society to yourself, that, they are clearly related for sure.
How does our belief in our own trauma shape us, do you believe?
Yeah, and like I said, I say in general that I want to stay positive, but I just gave you a very negative scenario, and that exists as well. And some of the things that I address in on my journey and my, it's like, why is it that my Italian grandfather, you know, came to America, was discriminated against, had to work hard, didn't have anything given to him, and he was able to succeed, you know, because he came here voluntarily. He came here voluntarily with a plan. So, him leaving his home, him leaving his homeland, his family, him being alone and isolated and relinquished was his personal choice. So he took it as a challenge. So for me, that is more, that's training. He's going to America to learn the language, to learn the culture, to learn society, to become an American. He's training himself to become an American, and he's proud of that. And that was his free will. That was his free will decision to do that. So he looked at it as a positive experience. Jack, this is a beautiful country. There's gold in the streets, and all you got to do is get up early and you'll succeed. Okay. So now I think I go through my mental, exercise here. And I was like, what would my Black grandfather have said to me? What would my African American grandfather, I have to imagine what he would have said to me. He would have said a lot of the same things. He would have said, yeah, you're not going to have it easy. You're going to have to struggle. Things aren't going to be given to you. You have to fight for them. And on top of it, we didn't choose to come here. We were kidnapped, thrown on a ship, put over here, indentured servants, slaves. We had to fight for our rights. And then once we fought for our rights, they changed the laws so that they fought against us again. They had Jim Crow laws, and they had, different, so what's the difference there? There's a very similar path between my Italian heritage and struggle and strife and my African American side. It was the voluntary aspect of it. My Italian grandfather voluntarily came here to put himself in a position of trauma, and he relished in that trauma as something that was making him better. Yeah, I'm going through trauma, but I'm going through trauma for my kids, for my kids' kids, for my future, whatever. Whereas the African American side was, well, we didn't choose, we were just brought here. And I think that's a huge, so it's like, is your trauma, is it self-inflicted, self-desired? My son, he's wrestling. He goes through trauma every day with wrestling. I mean? His coaches yell at him. They want him to do more. They want him to do harder. They want him to do faster. It's trauma. But he's voluntarily doing it, so that's training. And I think that voluntary aspect of, is the trauma voluntarily inflicted on you, that you're doing it for a purpose, or is it out of your control and society and others are putting that trauma on you?
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Is there, we've covered quite a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Obviously, listeners, there's links to Jack's book and website and stuff, and his socials in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to share with us, Jack?
Yeah, I think my biggest, I mean, like, we all have different ideas, and we're all over the board, adoptees in general, and I can be all over the board. I can look at things as very positive and very negative. And I try to, in my book, I try to, express those feelings as I had them and how I had them. But I think the bottom line is that adoptees need to be involved in the process. That if adoption is going to be something that we do, you have to take the opinions and the experiences of adoptees and look into them deeper, and get opinions, not just, talking heads who have, they have a conflict of interest. Therapists want it to be traumatic because then it earns them more patients. Politicians want it to be traumatic or want it to be whatever for their constituency. So I think adoptees, across the board, happy adoptees, angry adoptees, whatever you classify yourself as, we need to be involved in the situation much more than what we have been historically.
Well, thank you, Jack. Some powerful stuff there, especially the neuroscience bit. We've never got anywhere near that, so thank you very much for bringing that to the show, and your philosophical and practical side, and obviously your brain's highly tuned. You don't become a pediatric surgeon without having a bright brain. So thank you for bringing that to the show, and thank you for everything that you do for the kids, as a surgeon.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. But what I would say is, I may be intelligent as an orthopedic surgeon, but when it comes to the adoption phenomenon and the adoption complexity, I think a lot of us are really, mental midgets when it comes to figuring it out, because it's complex, it's deep, and a lot of it is subconscious, which is inaccessible to most of us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
thank you.
You nailed it. Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers. Goodbye.